Jesus is going to have to be our wave offering. Jesus dies on Friday. He rests on the Sabbath. And then he's resurrected on Sunday. Now watch what happens in Jesus' life. Okay? Jesus has been resurrected. The ladies come to the tomb. They don't know where he's at. And Jesus, Mary's there crying. And Mary's talking to who she thinks is the gardener, right? Then Jesus says unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? Whom seekest thou? She, supposing he was a gardener, said unto him, Sir, if thou have bore him hence, tell me where thou hast laid him, and I will take him away. So she wants to give Jesus a proper burial. And she's there and he's gone. Then Jesus said unto her, Mary. The way he said Mary unto her, she understood it was Jesus, and she turns herself and says unto him, Rabboni, which is to say, Master. Then can you imagine, Mary is now running over to him. When you see somebody you haven't seen in a while, don't you get a little excited? Jesus says unto her, Touch me not, for I had not yet ascended to my Father. You remember? The next day was the wave offering. That was done in the heavenly sanctuary. The earthly sanctuary had ended dealing with the death of Jesus on the cross. The veil ripped from top to bottom. So what they were doing in that sanctuary at this point meant nothing. Jesus was going to go himself to the sanctuary because that's what was supposed to happen. The priest went in there on Sunday with a wave offering, foretelling that's what Christ was going to do. So Jesus is saying to her, I have not yet gone to my Father. Don't touch me. But go to my brethren and say to them, I ascended my Father and to your Father and to my God and your God. He said, I'm going there. Then you find they're in the upper room. They're there and they're scared, right? Now Jesus now suddenly appears. This is at night. This is the evening time. So in other words, he's telling them, he stands in the midst of them and he says, Peace unto you. And he goes on to say, but they were afraid and supposed that he was a spirit, right? Somebody from the dead, some kind of a spirit, right? Then Jesus says unto them, okay, why are you troubled? And why do your thoughts arise in your heart? He says, Behold my hands and my feet. It is I myself. Handle me. Mary's there. Don't touch me. I have not yet gone to the Father. After Jesus goes to the Father, he finishes the work there as the first fruits of the dead. He comes back to this earth and he says, Handle me. For a spirit doth not have flesh and bone. You see? Exactly. But now is Jesus risen from the dead and became the first fruits of them that slept. There it is in scriptures anyways. Talking by the disciples. The first fruits were offered before the veil the third day. The first day, of course, the Passover. The second day was the Sabbath. The third day was the first fruits. Jesus rose the third day. Jesus has now fulfilled that feast day. Let's look at another one. Now the next one is called the Feast of Weeks. Okay? This one here is also known as the Pentecost. Now what you were to do, you are now to go back home and do your harvest. Okay? You're going to have 50 days to complete the harvest. Then at the end of that 50 days, you are to be back again at the sanctuary with a larger offering than you had the first time. Okay? And ye shall count unto you from the morrow, starting with Sunday, after the Sabbath, from the day that ye brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be complete. That's your 50 days. Okay? That's exactly when the disciples were in the upper room, when they were filled with the Holy Spirit. You see, the example that God gives in scriptures is now meeting their fulfillment. So now you have seen that every feast day that has taken place inside of the spring has met its fulfillment in Jesus' life. Every one of them. 3,000 were baptized in that one day. That's a much bigger harvest. Wouldn't you like to sit and seeing 3 people, 3,000 baptized in one day? That's what happened when they were filled with the Spirit on the day of Pentecost. Now there's 3 more in the fall. Now the first one was called the Feast of Trumpets. Now the Feast of Trumpets, what that was designed to do, you see, they had the Day of Atonement every year. So the Feast of Trumpets was designed to be 10 days before the Day of Atonement. So what they would do is they would announce the arrival of the Day of Atonement by blowing the trumpets. So when you hear the trumpets blow, you know in your mind, oh no, I've got 10 days to be ready for the Day of Atonement. So the 10 days of getting ready for the Day of Atonement, you would make things right with your neighbor, you make things right with your family, you would make sure you're right with God, because the Day of Atonement, you were going to stand outside the sanctuary, standing there while your life is being brought up before God on the Day of Atonement. So the 10 days was like, oh no, let's get busy and get it done. All right? Now, trumpets blew 10 days before the Day of Atonement. There's a time back in history that you will find dealing with William Miller. Now last night we saw that the Day of Atonement began according to Scriptures, and by the way, we use history to show the Day of Atonement arrived in 1844. History shows when Jesus died. History shows when Jesus was baptized. And we saw that we could take that time period and go backwards, even if we didn't have history, to show us when the decree to restore and build Jerusalem. But we have both. So we know both, and they come out exactly on time. And so we've taken that figure and we came to 1844. So we know in the time in which we would believe the Day of Atonement begins in the heavenly sanctuary. This particular feast shows us that we're correct. Okay? There was a movement, not from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. For those of you who are here trying to say the Seventh-day Adventist Church is the one that made the 1844 message. No. This was a group of believers mixed up from all churches, and they were scattered from one end of the earth to the other without the media. In other words, there were people in different parts of the world that learned the message that we went through last night. They saw the Day of Atonement was to arrive in 1844, and about 10 years prior to 1844, it became a huge cry. And the world believed it. It was like wildfire. For 10 years, they were announcing not the Day of Atonement, but Christ's second coming. They had the dates right, but they had the event wrong. They thought the cleansing of the sanctuary, which is what the Day of Atonement is, meant His second coming. So they were announcing Christ is coming in 1844. So for 10 years, they announced that Christ was coming in 1844, and the trumpets blew 10 days before the Day of Atonement. The thing is, we found out last night, to understand prophecy, a day is a year. So you know that a day is a year. There's 10 years now referred to before the Day of Atonement. And by the way, just so you do know, the Bible is very clear in Revelation 10 that this date took place. It was sweet in the mouth, bitter in their stomach. Story's there. But He says there's time no longer. There's no more day for a year in Bible prophecy. We've seen it all. The sanctuary's told the whole story. The only thing left is His coming. And nobody knows when that is. So don't try to choose and find a date. Nobody knows. There's no prophecy in the Scripture to tell you. There was no time in which the high priest came out of the most holy place. They didn't know when he came out. He didn't even have the bells and pomegranates. They didn't even know when he walked from here into here until after he places back on his garments. So don't try to find a time in which Christ's second coming is going to be. We just know we're close. We know the seasons. We can tell by the season that we're in the end of time. But we don't know the time, the day, or the hour. Keep that in mind, okay? The trumpets blew. And it's interesting that William Miller and those around the world all preached Christ was coming in 1843, 1844. 10 years prior to that. Now, you remember when Jesus had that triumphal entry? He comes in just before all this was taking place. He comes in riding up on this colt, right? So he rides in there, and as he's riding in there, everybody's saying, wow, this is our king. They were excited. That was a form of a king riding on a colt. That was representing a king. And they're thinking, here's our king, right? And they were so excited about it that they took off their coats and they laid it down. They found branches. They put it down. They are singing. They're making rejoicing. Think about it. Jesus is going to be king. He's the one that can bring food. Remember, he had 2 fish and just a little, was it 3 fish and 2 loaves? And he takes it and he multiplies it. And he feeds everybody, and there was all these baskets left over. Then Lazarus dies. He raises them from the dead. Now that's a perfect king. We got an awesome king. He can make everybody well. Everybody will be full. No one will be hungry. And so they're excited that here comes Jesus the king. But they misunderstood what he was riding in there for. If they would have recognized that he was riding in there to die, they would not have had the zeal that they had as they were walking, as he was going inside that gate. And the same thing with those who thought Christ was coming in 1844. If it was only his movement from the holy into the most holy place, they would not have had the zeal that they had, thinking that Christ was moving and that he wasn't actually coming. It's happened in the past. It happened in Jesus' day. Sometimes we misunderstand the event. But these people would not have been nearly as excited about 1844 if they thought it wasn't his second coming. The Day of Atonement has arrived. In other words, we're living now in the Day of Atonement. The story's coming to the end. This is the 6th story. Now we're in the feast day dealing with the Day of Atonement. The feast day of the Day of Atonement was the Day of Atonement we've been talking about. Jesus has been there since 1844. How much longer will he be there? We do not know. But we do know that he is there. We do know that what happens when he's finished, he puts the censer down. And we do know that after the censer is placed down, then we see his second coming. We saw last night in Daniel 8:14 that says, and unto 2,300 days then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And we saw the prophecy leading to the 1844. Day of Atonement has arrived. So that there has 5 feast days that have met their fulfillment. There's 5 that was, and there's 1 that we're in right now. And there's 1 more yet to come. And that's the next one, the Feast of Tabernacles. Now the Feast of Tabernacles was given to them so that they would they would remember their travels from Egypt to Canaan. Remember that 40 years wandering in the wilderness? So what they would do is they would come out of their homes. They would travel to Egypt, and to Jerusalem, and they would place and make these little booths or huts, or we can call them tents. Okay? And then they would come live in those, and they would live in them for 7 days. That 7 days was to remind them of their travels from Egypt to Canaan. So once the Day of Atonement is over, the only thing left is our travels from Egypt to Canaan.